Right, great. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Navigating Uncertainty series in partnership with the LightHouse Arabia under the Femtech Hub at the Women's Pavilion, Expo City, in partnership with Meme Foundation, American Hospital Dubai, and Pericare. This series and Femtech Hub is where we're creating space for more honest, grounded conversations around women's health, with a particular focus today on mental and emotional well-being. And these are honestly the conversations that are designed to be grounded, honest, and reflective of how women are actually experiencing their lives today. So thank you for joining us. Today's session is about women leaders under pressure. And this is not about generic resilience, it's about what's actually happening internally for women that are navigating leadership, motherhood, and uncertainty at the same time. I'm joined by Anna White, who is a licensed occupational therapist and seasoned mental health practitioner with over a decade of experience. She's the director of corporate and workplace services at the LightHouse Arabia, and through this role and expertise, she develops and manages corporate partnerships in addition to delivering tailored mental health and well-being programs to the private and public sector organizations in the UAE. And in addition to her leadership role, Anna frequently runs support groups and works closely with clients to instill a workplace culture that prioritizes mental health, well-being, and her approach is always grounded in psychological science and a deep understanding of corporate environments, with a commitment to helping organizations foster more resilient, supportive cultures and open dialogue around mental health. Thank you for joining me, Anna.
Thank you.
Shall we dive right in?
Yeah, let's go. I was thinking, who's that person you're talking about there? Is that me? I don't know if I do all
It's
of
you,
those
Anna.
things,
It's you.
but I try. Thank you. It's so good to be here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation and also learning and reflecting myself. So, yeah,
Incredible.
I'm excited. Let's do it.
So let's start with the obvious question. How does uncertainty currently show up differently in women leaders compared to the women in general?
Yeah, that's a big question, isn't it? And I was reflecting on some of these questions as well, personally, but also from what I know with psychology as well. And I would say the thing about uncertainty, that word that we've heard so much about lately, is that it does affect everyone. It's hitting everyone at many different layers. But if we look at women in leadership, we have to say that it is very layered. There's so many layers. I was imagining this layered kind of granular experience this morning. As I was thinking about this question, but there is professional responsibility on top of the invisible load that many women in leadership are already holding, that will affect essentially their cognition, their emotional load, all of those things. So there's the operational responsibility, but there's also the home. So it's like this completely two different houses, but they're all merged together. So I think that for women in leadership is quite significant. The research calls this the mental load. And when I think about the mental load, it's like having 25 tabs open on your laptop and none of them ever are closed. So even though you might not be there physically, you're there. You're always thinking. So you're planning, you're organizing, you're anticipating, you're trying to predict what might happen next. So essentially, you're always on the go. And I think that level of not knowing with uncertainty is really very, very difficult for women in leadership, because as a woman in leadership myself, I like to know. I like to know what's next. I like to be prepared, because the only way I can be quite high functioning at many times is to actually have a hold and control different things. And when that layer of control is taken away from us, it really, I would say, um, we struggle with it, and often people around us can struggle if we struggle as well, because they often look up to us. I would also say that it leads us to almost like this identity conflict. It's like, well, I need to be really steady for others, but I'm also struggling myself. So I think the layers that we have as women in leadership are actually very, very complex and nuanced, and we don't often talk about them enough.
Yeah, and to that point, like there's this expectation of being composed all the
Mm,
time. Like you're under pressure, you're navigating uncertainty in the workplace, at home, in the world, but you still have to look very composed. What does
mhm.
that do to our mental health over time?
I love this question. And I also think about myself running from my last session in here, and I was thinking, I'm really stressed inside, but I'm going to show up here and smile. But now I'm regulating, I'm coming back online. But that's what happens. We literally feel the need that I've actually got to really show up and I've got to look a certain way and I've got to be steady and calm and composed. And I think what we have to remember is that the pressure to appear composed doesn't remove stress. It actually just forces the stress that we have underground. And when we force it underground, it's almost like that statement, brush it under the rug. And I'm sure we've all heard of that, or brush it under the carpet or the rug, whatever you've got in your home. And often we think, well, if I just keep going and I forget about this and push it aside because I need to, because of who I am and what I need to do and who's looking up to me, that will eventually go away. But often what happens is that rug that we're pushing all the dirt under just gets so big that we eventually trip over it. And then we're down. And then we need to really, really start getting back up. So I think knowing as a woman with any kind of leadership, by the way, you might be leading yourself, you're leading your family, you're leading your business. There's many different layers here. But know that emotional suppression is very real. And there's a big difference between regulating your emotions and actually suppressing. Now, suppressing, if we actually don't tend to that wound or that rug or that dirt, often what happens is suppression will move into chronic suppression. And chronic suppression affects our mental health. So back to your question, how does it affect mental health? Well, all of the research will show that it will increase everything from stress to anxiety to maybe risk factors for things like clinical depression to burnout. And there's a beautiful visual out there called the stress spiral. And you can Google this in your own time. And it shows the progression of healthy stress. And people don't often know that stress can be very, very productive and healthy. And it is, as long as you are, recharging and you're doing what you need to do to kind of ride through the waves of life, essentially. But if we let, the good stress essentially become unmanaged, it then goes up the spiral. So you have healthy stress and then you have unmanaged stress. And then that can lead to chronic stress. Chronic stress can lead to burnout. And then burnout, if we don't tend to that, potentially will lead to a mental illness. And that's the diagnostic stuff. That is, anxiety disorders or clinical depression or PTSD or whatever it is that we might experience. So it's really important to sometimes just take a moment to say, well, where am I and what is my composure doing? Is it healthy? Am I actually creating some space to process and to regulate and to let the volcano, erupt in small, healthy ways? Or am I a pressure cooker where I'm just waiting and waiting and waiting? Because that can be quite an unhealthy way to live. And I think when we live like that, we can become very disconnected from ourselves.
Yeah. I like the pressure cooker analogy. I can remember it brought me vivid memories of moments when I felt like a pressure cooker. And that brings me to the second point is I know we're going to be talking about navigating uncertainty as a caregiver, as a mother at the next session, but also women leaders sometimes experience this collision between your leadership role and your caregiving role. What does it do to us psychologically when you're going through
Yeah.
that conflict?
It's quite a collide, I would say. And sometimes we talk about it, but sometimes we just know it's there and we still talk about it, but we don't actually acknowledge it. And I think the biggest thing that it does when our lives and our work interferes with family or our other responsibilities, whatever they are, it has a huge strain on our identity. But not only our identity and our sense of self, other things from a cognitive capacity, like our attention, our emotional capacity. And I think if you look at a lot of the research on role conflict, it's often rooted in what would be called work-family conflict theory, which is quite an interesting one. And there's two main types. And, you might relate to one or the other or a mixture of both. There's work-family conflict, and that's basically when your work creeps into your family life. And then there's the opposite, which is family work, when your family or your family responsibilities will creep in or spill over into your work. But what I find quite interesting about the research done within this field is that women are more impacted when their work spills into their family life, according to the research, compared to the opposite for men. And men often are more impacted when their family interferes with their work. Now, not always. We're all very individual, and we can show up in different ways. But I think the collision happens because it's deeply, deeply personal. And often it leaves us, from a psychological perspective, just feeling very exhausted. Mental fatigue is very real. Our attention can go down. Even symptoms that I've noticed in myself, and I see them in others as well, little things like forgetfulness, or needing a lot of reassurance, or having all those tabs opened that I mentioned before. And when all of these things happen and we finish our day as a working professional, it can leave you feeling like a failure, like you didn't accomplish things, like there's guilt there. Like, who am I? Who am I, and why? Those big questions that we reach. Am I being a good enough mom? Am I showing up for my team in a strong way? Am I a steady leader? What are my values? Am I living by my values? So the collision often just brings to the surface a lot of things that we are still trying to push under that rug.
I mean, we all know about that mom guilt, right? I wonder if when you bring it back to the workplace, because a lot of times women leaders, we also act like parents to our teams in moments of uncertainty, and especially in the UAE, where you would have a team that comes from different cultures, different backgrounds. How does that look? How do you navigate that, and how do you lead a team who experiences and deals with stress differently, that could be potentially influenced by their backgrounds or their cultures, and still, again, maintain composure yourself?
Yeah. It's a really great question. And I would say how we respond, and I'm going to come to culture, but how we respond as individuals is very unique. So everyone's response is very unique. And sometimes that can be related to our upbringing or our styles of working or parenting or whatever it might be. But I think always remember, uncertainty is universal, but how we cope is often, shaped by essentially our culture. And as you said, here in the UAE, we are often working with, many different cultures. And, I heard someone say last week, which really stuck with me, that we all have very different tolerance levels, which also can be in different ways related to culture. And if you look at cross-cultural psychology, some cultures will prefer structure and stability and rules and routines. And that level of control is very grounding, and really how they work. That's how they thrive, not just survive. That's how they thrive. But you can have potentially other cultures that are actually more flexible. I shouldn't even say more flexible. I don't know if that's the right word. I would say they are more comfortable with ambiguity, with fluidity. So the difference between maybe one person saying, just tell me the plan, I need to know what we're doing tomorrow, versus someone saying, let's just wait and figure out and see how we go. So I think knowing that there's many different people at the table, and even if you can just visualize, because I'm thinking of different teams that I've worked with, it's not always the obvious either. Like, sometimes we assume that someone will be a certain way or perceive uncertainty from a certain lens because of their culture, and it's the opposite. Sometimes we're sitting at a round table and someone is obviously quite anxious and needs structure, and another person seems super easy and breezy, but actually underneath, internally, they're spiraling and they just don't want you to know. And then you might have someone who's not saying anything at all, and that might be someone who we're not gonna, the way we often say, if you do not look, you will not see. But sometimes if we don't really go under and go scuba diving and go beneath the surface, we actually won't know, because presentation is just presentation. It's just tip of the iceberg. So I think we need to be very, very mindful of cultures. But if I bring it back to a leadership perspective, like how to manage this, it's really knowing that as a leader, the role is not to standardize your approach, because we can't do that because of diversity among cultures, but it's to recognize all the differences that might be there and create enough flexibility for everyone in that team to actually feel supported at some way or in some way or another, essentially.
And what does that flexibility look like? Because You just said something wonderful. It's really about creating that space and not waiting for somebody to show or demonstrate their internal spiraling. How do you create that environment, that safe space?
I would say it is the exception. It is not the norm. If we look at the research on psychological safety, which is essentially, feeling safe to be vulnerable and be honest and share and ask for what you need and admit your mistakes and all those things, most organizations out there, according to the research, struggle with psychological safety. The ones who do will really put a huge effort into connectivity and communication styles, and knowing that actually a team that's going to be very productive are a team that can be honest with one another, a team where there's space to share, a team where they're not judged. And I would say, and I could speak about this for hours, but how I would summarize it is one of the main building blocks is a leader who creates that. Because no matter, you can have really vulnerable and lovely people in an organization who are so safe. But if the person who's at the top of the house, almost like a parent at home, is not showing up as someone who is open and vulnerable and admits their mistakes and listens to other people and is not reactive and responds instead of reacting, that sets the tone, because the leader will always be the emotional thermostat. If you're too high or too low, it's contagious. It's the emotional contagion. You'll set every room in that, whole organization to your pace. So I think really looking at, am I showing up as a leader the way I want people to show up with me? So if I pretend like everything's okay and that nothing bothers me and that this is, that everyone's sailing through this, and I don't leave any space for actually being a little bit authentic and honest, then I can never expect my team to do the same with me. So it's creating a safe environment. And I will also add here, it's not about, because when I say that sometimes with leaders, they'll say, oh, but is that not going to create a lot of flexibility and then people won't work hard and, productivity is going to fluctuate? No, I would say the complete opposite. Being safe and actually opening up communication lines and introducing vulnerability in a healthy, boundaried way is what makes teams thrive. And it doesn't mean that you're letting people off the hook or you're going easy on everyone. It's high boundaries and high organization and rules and all those other things, but it's having them at a balance with all the other stuff. That's what makes a team thrive.
Amazing. I mean, like as a psychologist and occupational therapist, when you do your sessions, your trains, your expertise includes the ability to kind of distance yourself from probably the conversations that you're having. But when I think of myself or any other woman leader, how can any woman leader show empathy, support anxious teams without absorbing it themselves? Because you just said you are the emotional thermostat. If I'm supporting everybody, can my well empty up and not be able to give back? Any tricks to not get there?
Love this. And how I would answer this, and if I go into a rabbit hole and answer a different question, you're going to have to pull me back because I'm thinking of a
Yeah.
few different things now. But I would say a lot of it goes down to supporting yourself first. And all those things that we see, you cannot give what you do not have. You got to put, fill your own cup first, oxygen mask rule. But that is the most important thing a leader, a parent, anyone who's leading a person or a project or anything in their life can do. And a lot of that will go down to self-awareness. So if I'm a self-aware leader and I know where I am on any given day and what I need and what I can say yes to and what I can say no to and how much I have to give and how little I have to give. And sometimes I'll say the door's always open and sometimes I'll say the door's closed today unless you're available between 4 and 5 p.m. So it is boundaries. It's actually important to know yourself. Self-awareness, because the more aware you are of where you are and what you need and what you have capacity for, the more you will know how much you can give your team, the more you can know how many check-ins that you can have and how much empathy you have on that day and all of those things. But if you don't have that and we get stuck in the race and we're rushing and we just want to help everyone, but we are running on nothing ourselves, we will then burn out because we will be more likely when we're stressed to absorb instead of observe people. And I'll also say that A lot of people will say, especially leaders will say to me, Anna, I'm such an empath. I give everything to everyone else. I feel drained at the end of the day. Empathy has a ceiling. There's no such thing as too much empathy. Now, maybe if you're a caregiver and you're supporting elderly people or your kids at home, that's different. We have a caregiver responsibility, so they can often take things from us. And that means we need to double up on the self-care in order to recharge. So there has to be recharge. But with our teams, a lot of the time, the goal is not to be a caregiver. And we don't want to go into a situation where we're actually maybe even causing a barrier for someone to get the support they need professionally because we are showing up and we're saying, well, I'm your therapist, because actually you're not. And empathy is about giving, and it's about listening, and it's about sharing, but it's also about giving back and saying, now I'm going back to my leadership responsibilities. Now I'm leaving work and going home to my family. Doesn't mean that I don't care. You are literally naming it, you are parking it, you are coming back to your life, and you can revisit that whenever you want. But when you are taking someone else's toll, when you are taking whatever's coming up for them and it's affecting your capacity, that actually is quite a dangerous place to be, because we can't do that with everyone. And the more it takes from us, the less we'll actually be able to give them tomorrow and the next day and next week and next month. And just a bit of a visualization to help you remember this. I want you to imagine it's raining. Okay. And I want you to imagine that one of your colleagues is stuck in the rain and it's really, really raining. And you go over to them and you say, hey, here's an umbrella. And you go under that umbrella with them and you talk to them and you use those open-ended questions, and you're not problem solving, you're listening, you're creating that open space. That conversation is probably going to end. And you're probably going to say, hey, you can keep the umbrella, but I've got to go back. And you run back inside. But you can go back at any time that you want. But you are not following them around in the rain, because that is not healthy for them, but it's also not healthy for you as a leader.
We're getting a lot of hearts for this answer, and I agree with that. That is a very insightful perspective. I'm going to keep that in mind every time I feel like I have to take care of my team. Now, let's add a bit of a scientific layer. Can
Mm-hmm.
you explain to us what happens to your brain, your nervous system, your body, or potentially even hormones when you're under prolonged uncertainty or pressure or stress?
Yeah. What happens? I would say it's very different coping styles, different ways of recharging, different windows of tolerance. But I think what many of us are probably in right now is prolonged stress. It's like chronic stress. And I'll first explain how it's very different than acute stress. So acute is usually once off. Something happens, we get stressed, we fall down, but we get back up. A difficult meeting in work, a difficult parent-teacher meeting with the kids, whatever it might be. But that there's an on and an off, like there's a start and there's a finish. It's a difficult conversation, but now it's over. But with what we're in right now, the system has literally been activated often for weeks on end for many people, especially if it's a prolonged stressor. And I'm not just talking about regional things, it could be anything in your life. So over time, we have sustained activation of the stress response, right? That leads to the fact that we believe there's no clear endpoint here. So we can't be saying, oh, if I could just get through this week, first week back at school, if we could just get through this, we'll be okay. Because we don't know what will happen next week or the week after or the week after. So this often leaves us feeling very tired, very hypervigilant. And that stress, kind of like the spiral I mentioned before, it accumulates, and that affects our capacity. So what we know from research right now is that most people, when they go through prolonged stress like this, they are functioning at much lower capacity. Yet for many of us here today as leaders, we're holding ourselves accountable to our old algorithms. I hear everyone saying, oh, when is it going to be normal again? And has it returned to normal? Or why can't I do what I used to do, 2 months ago? Why am I tired? Why am I forgetting things? Why can't I show up today? You have to understand the neuroscience of your brain, that your brain is actually prioritizing keeping you alive right now, keeping the news at the first, threat response, essentially. So when all the energy is going to, keeping you safe and keeping you ready and hypervigilant, all the other things that it sees as priority or, non-essential to keep you alive, like your memory or maybe your logical thinking and your organization, all of those things kind of get pushed into the back seat. So we are probably working more tired. We're working with different kind of attention spans. We are not able to make the same decisions or as sharp as we used to. Now, not everyone. But a lot of
Yeah.
people, that's what the brain science will tell us.
Yeah, I once heard an American psychiatrist say that we need to take care of our brains just like we worry about our liver and
Mhm.
heart and any other organ, but we don't think about that. We don't, nobody says, "Oh, I'm going to make sure that I have a healthy brain," until we reach burnout and realize, "Oh my
Exactly.
God, we need to, we should have done better." Now, speaking of burnout, what are some indications? When do we know? Because I think we all know of the concept of burnout, but we wait so long, especially high functioning women leaders. We continue to perform under so much pressure when probably we are already experiencing burnout until we crash. What are the early signs of burnout? When do we need to kind of like stop and pause and maybe seek help?
That's a good question. Can I go back before I answer that? Can I go a
Yeah.
little bit around and then I'll answer?
Yes, of
And
course.
I think, firstly, it's the why. And that's a big question. Like, why do women leaders burn out? Why do people burn out? And I always want you to remember they're not burning out because they can't cope. They're burning out because they can cope so well. And that's something that you have to be mindful of because that's often what happens. You cope so well, you do so much, you literally you don't drop the ball, you just carry more balls than usual. You literally take on a lot more. And the performance that you have completely masks the internal distress. So it's kind of like this growing iceberg, but nobody really sees it because you're still showing up and you're meeting your KPIs and your jobs are getting done and everyone's giving you a high five. And often then the more credit you get, the more you're like, well, I'm falling apart on the inside, but like on the outside, it looks really good. So I'm going to keep going. So slowing down can often feel like defeat. And I felt that I felt that many times. Like I knew I needed to slow down. I know I needed to get off the treadmill, but I couldn't because there was worries there. Like, am I going to lose my identity? Are people going to judge me because I'm female and maybe this wouldn't happen to someone else? Am I going to be letting my team down? I'm a leader. I need to show up for them. Who's going to steer the ship if I say I need to take a break? All those things happen. So often what happens over time is that women in leadership positions, they will delay. And the nervous system literally just really, over time begins to fall down with us. And I think that's something that I want you to be mindful of because it is that level of delay that leads to burnout. Because if I go back to the stress spiral, and I'll go back to your question now, how would I know if I was burnt out? It's not that you wake up burnt out. It's not something that we jump into. It looks like that sometimes. So you might hear people say, "Oh, one day she was fine, and the next day breakdown, couldn't come into work, signed off." It is usually over time where we're managing stress and then we're not managing stress. It becomes quite unhealthy and we're not recharging. Like just think about it really simply. You're not recharging. You're just not recharging your phone over time. Recharging gets less, self-care gets less. You become more unhealthy. And over time, it leads to burnout. Now, how would you know if you're burnt out? Burnout is not a mental illness. It's not a diagnosis. And there's many different definitions for burnout. A lot of the research focuses on workplace burnout, but that doesn't make sense because we know that women burn out faster than men, but we also know that unemployed people can burn out as well. Caregivers can burn out. So it is very important to understand that burnout can be very subjective. So how would I know if I was burnt out? If we asked everyone here today, what's burnout? You'll probably give me different answers, right? So it's very subjective. But what we do know from the research is it does affect our productivity. So if you are thinking like you're putting your foot on the accelerator, but the car is not moving, you're there, but you're not there. You literally cannot engage and you cannot perform. That might be a sign that you need to get it checked out. It might not mean that it's burnout, but usually it is to do with not being able to sustain what you've been doing. It is productivity. That's often very heavily correlated with burnout, essentially. So be mindful. Do you notice? And you might even notice that out of work, you're okay. You're able to perform at home. You're fine. You're enjoying the evenings. Weekends are fine. You're going on holidays. Everything's okay. But the minute you come into work, it's like the switch. Can't do this anymore. This horrible job, it's never going to get any better. And most people who reach burnout, you know what happens, which I think is very interesting? They jump ship and they resign and they move if it's not their own business. And they have a honeymoon period sometimes for 3 months, 6 months, sometime. And then they burn out again because sometimes it's not the system. It's how we are working or not working with the system. So a lot of it goes down to, how am I managing my stress? How am I managing my responsibilities? How do I find my balance? So a lot of it is, and if you think about intervention then for burnout, it goes back to, well, how did you get here? And how do we press a reset on all those different things so that this doesn't happen again? Whereas if I just go on holidays for 2 weeks, I'll probably come back very refreshed and not burnt out. But if I don't work on the time management and the energy management and the boundary setting and the people pleasing and whatever else led me to that, then it's just going to be like a revolving door that I keep, falling into. But I would say, if there's something in you that feels not okay, just get it checked out, just like you would for your physical health. Because, with the spiral, the longer we leave it, the more likely it is to grow into something else that requires a lot more care and support.
I feel like we need to pause here for a few seconds for everybody to just absorb what you just said, which is absolutely incredible and very powerful. If you were to give maybe a couple of evidence-based tools that we can use to actually work, anything that we can, especially in conditions that are not very ideal. You said that what we're experiencing right now is prolonged or chronic, stress. Is there something that you can share with our audience today that we can use?
I will try. I would like to give a long list, but I'll try. But I always veer towards the ones that I like as well, but they are evidence-based. But I'll give you mine. So I will give you 3, but before I give you 3, I want to give the foundational one. So it's not included. So I'm cheating a little bit. I get to have 4, okay? I would say the first thing is, nothing will really make sense unless the non-negotiables are in check. And the non-negotiables are sleep, nutrition, and exercise. Those are the foundations of mental health. Those are the biggest protective factors that you've got: sleep, nutrition, and exercise. So if you're going to think about anything, sleep, nutrition, and exercise, it's the basics. We know those, but we walk by those things because we want something new and fresh and exciting. Those are the things that will protect your brain, that will protect your performance, that will protect your mental health, your memory, your ability to, keep your immunity, all of those different things: sleep, nutrition, and exercise. So those are the non-negotiables. You've got to focus on those. And if people have questions, I will go into those in more detail. But I will give you 3 things that I think would be evidence-based tools for women in leadership. And I think the first thing is flexibility. You need to build in flexibility. And when we are stressed and when we are going through uncertain times, we rush and we don't have time to be flexible. Like, I did exactly the opposite today. As much as I tried not to, I did not give myself enough time between different sessions today. I do that occasionally. I can do it sometimes quite well during uncertain times. And if today was a busier day, it would have been a disaster. Today wasn't a very busy day for me. But the more responsibilities that you have as a leader, the more white space you need to have. Now, you might wake up and say, I don't need white space, but you should put it there, because we are working at lower capacity. You don't know what you're going to need. And you might have a lot of time, but you might not have the energy to do what you need to do. So white space can be a micro reset. 5 minutes between meetings, sitting in the car before you go into the office for 5 extra minutes, walking around, leaving your phone at your desk, going getting water without being on a voice note, just small resets throughout the day, stretching at your desk, having a yoga mat in your office, just to literally stretch it out or to shake it out or to do something. But build in flexibility. If you don't build it in, it won't be there. So you've got to actually put it into your schedule. Okay, so that's the first thing, flexibility. I think the second thing that I would say is have transition rituals. That's a big one. Have transition rituals from when I go from work mode to the other mode. Now, the other mode, I don't know what your other mode is. It could be mom. It could be, sister. It could be something else that you've on in your life. But you need to have transition rituals, because these things will really create psychological boundaries. And sometimes we've got to tell our brain. If not, the brain will just get all of that mixed up. And that's where the collisions happen that we talked about. So when I personally do my own transition rituals, I'm so lucky. I always used to complain that I live so far away in the desert, and now I love it. Because there's traffic and I literally am in the car for 45 minutes coming home. and I complain, but it literally is my transition ritual. I leave my work, and at the beginning of the car journey, I'm thinking about the emails and the clients and everything. But by the time I get there, I literally have done the work and I get out of the car. And sometimes I leave my briefcase in the car and I will be like, you're staying there because now mom's coming home and now wife's coming home and all the other things that I've got to do. So having transition rituals, and it could even be that you sit in your car or you wait outside before you go into that house, or you literally say, I need a moment, and you have a script ready. You know, some of you might be working from home right now. It needs to be a closure where you say, I'm closing my laptop now, I'm going on lunch break, or I'm done with today. And I think when we're working from home as well, it's really difficult because all those, things get blurred. So if you usually come home from work and go to the gym, you should be going to the gym. If you usually have a shower after you come home from work, and even if you feel like you don't need one, you have one, because you're literally creating the associations of, I'm closing one and I'm stepping into another. So that's the second one. So first one, flexibility. Second one is transitional cues. And I think the third one, which is one that I know everyone has heard of before, but I want you to, walk the walk, not just talk about it. It is the good enough framework. And that is, if you are currently closing the end of your day and saying, oh, another terrible day, I didn't get through everything I needed to, have so much to do, it's all piling up. If this is you right now, this one is for you. Okay. It's the good enough framework. And that means not, what if I have to do? I have to do everything, or I'm not where I want to be. It's, what do I need to do that actually matters today? And for me, I like to just do three things. Like, that's my priority. When I'm feeling low capacity, when I'm feeling a bit behind, it is, what are three things that are really important for me to do? Because I know, even though all the other little fillers won't get done today, if I have those three big things done, that's going to really help me. And I would also say, do them when you have the most energy and the most ability to be productive. And there's a lovely quote out there, and I'm probably going to quote it wrong, but I think it is, if it is your job to eat two frogs, eat the biggest one first. And it basically means get to the big things done. And usually for people, that's first thing in the morning. That's usually when circadian rhythm is there and we're swimming with the current instead of against it. And then in the afternoon, you leave the more creative tasks or the autopilot emails that you can do in your sleep almost. So just be mindful. So those would be my three things: flexibility, transition rituals, and a good enough plan for your day.
I hope everybody was taking notes. You just made me realize something about, distant learning and working from home. It was very stressful for me, as probably everybody else, but I realized just now that a huge part of it is because I did not get to practice my transition ritual. Because my transitional ritual, and people will be laughing, but I actually, as soon as I get in the car on my way to work, I play upbeat music and I'm almost dancing in the car. That's how I get out of my home, being a mom and being the home mode to the work mode. And because I was not driving, I lost that. So I was almost like getting out of bed, and I should be, all of a sudden a professional,
Exactly.
So
And you know
it's,
what I was
when you
saying to
frame it like
people?
that, it's so powerful.
Yeah. And what you've said is the perfect example, because most people who have lost their commute time to work now haven't filled it with anything related to self-care.
No.
Like, it's literally straight into work. You're waking up stressed, on social media, checking everything, whatever it might be. So even like that could be just one thing that you could do if you are not back at work in person. Use the hour or the 20 minutes or whatever it was for you. Replace that car journey with something for yourself, just something in the morning for self-care. Like, listen to the music, call. For me, it's like a call with someone. And I noticed over the last few weeks, I wasn't calling my sisters. I was like, oh, I've no news, I don't want everyone asking me. And you don't realize over time, but that accumulates. Those were the little releases from the pressure cooker that you actually really needed, that you forgot about.
Amazing. I want to leave time for questions because we've got a few of them, and actually a lot of them have to do probably with how we reframe leadership or define leadership in the first place. How do you lead? We've got a question. How do you lead authentically? How do you show emotional awareness and vulnerability without feeling exposed or being perceived as weak or being judged? In moments like these, when there is, uncertainty, prolonged uncertainty, what would be a healthy psychological definition of leadership?
I think,
Or authentic leadership. Let's
yeah,
add this to it as well.
I think vulnerability is a big thing. And I think it's probably one of the most misunderstood concepts in leadership. And I think, when I go into a leadership team and I say, we're going to talk about vulnerability, people are like, oh no, it's like this naked exposure. What am I going to share? And that's the biggest myth. Like, vulnerability is not telling your colleagues or sharing your deepest, darkest secrets or your regrets or your failures. It's like an onion. Vulnerability has so many layers. So it's about, how do I be authentic and give just enough to the right person? So a lot of vulnerability is also about, well, who am I sharing it with? Because not everyone deserves your vulnerability. And, Brené Brown often says something along the lines of, vulnerability can be weaponized or it can be rewarded. So you've got to make sure that you're sharing your vulnerability with people who are going to reward it. So vulnerability in certain environments can be, and this happened to me recently, where I observed a leader doing this and I loved it. It was the difference between leaders that might show up and say, what's the big deal? The show must go on. Everyone's fine. We've got this. To someone who said, oh, I'm just really exhausted today. I'm really behind. And for me, it was like a light bulb. Like, wow, we can relate now. Whereas I would have always never said that in front of you, maybe. So sometimes it's just about saying it the way it is in a very surface level way. Like, yeah, online learning is really hard. I'm struggling as a mom right now. Or, I really, really was disappointed that I didn't get through my work last week, or whatever it might be. So vulnerability has lots of layers. So I would say, as a woman in leadership, with vulnerability, you want to be selective, but you do want to be very intentional about the message, but be very aware of the context. Because as I said, not everyone deserves it. So it's you deciding, how can I show up in an authentic way that resonates with who I am and my values? And a lot of it underneath vulnerability is confidence, and it's self-awareness and really self-esteem, all those things. Because the more assured you are of yourself, you won't really care if someone is like judging you or gives you a weird facial expression or says something, because it's rooted in who you are. And sometimes it's even making mistakes. As a leader, I love to say in front of my team, oh, I really messed that one up, or we should have gone with your idea, not mine. I was wrong. Like, that is being vulnerable, but that is so powerful to people on your team, because they now see you as someone who's authentic and who's safe and who they can relate to. So it opens the doors for them to do it as well. And when we can actually communicate better and be more authentic with one another, we work better. So it's really good for the business too. It's all interconnected.
Now, you mentioned being assured in yourself. Here's a loaded question. How do you actually avoid, it's asked by somebody here, and how do you avoid that self-doubt that, a lot of times women in leadership roles, they have that imposter syndrome.
Mm.
How do we avoid that, especially in moments like this? I know it's loaded. It could be a session on its own. It needs a workshop. But is there a
Yeah.
quick answer? Is there something that you can do to reassure yourself before you go on the path of reassuring your team?
It's a great question, and I think it comes up a lot. I would say, instead of the mindset of, how do I get rid of it? I would say, how can I lean into this? How can I lean into self-doubt? Like, let's go there. Let's literally go down that rabbit hole and spiral. And you literally talk to yourself. You're naming it. Well, I think this will happen, and I think I'm not good enough, and I think I'll never be this, and you literally allow yourself to externalize what's internal, because a lot of it is not actually self-doubt, it's suppressing the self-doubt. So the self-doubt is under the rug, and it's getting bigger and bigger, and you've never acknowledged it, so it just continues to grow. So I would say, lean into it. And once you lean into it and you actually are okay to tolerate that, I can still lead this organization and still have self-doubt sitting somewhere on me, but the difference is that I am in the driver's seat. So it's kind of like the inner critic. Like, it's like the inner voice that's there. It's not going to go away, but you can you can talk back to that inner critic. You can talk back to self-doubt and say, I know you think I'm not good enough and I'm never going to be promoted and I'll never be as good as him, but actually I've got this. So you're actually living with discomfort. And that almost teaches you over time that you have control, that it's not going to go away. It's going to be there with you, but you have the ability to almost dilute the impact that it has on your life. Now, that would just be my thoughts on it. So I would say, don't think about getting rid of it, because self-doubt could be helpful in a way. I know not everyone would agree with that, but I think self-doubt keeps me really on edge. I think it makes me work harder and be more productive and healthier in many ways, as long as I am the one driving and it is in the backseat, essentially. So that would be my advice. Lean into self-doubt. Go there.
Amazing. Another question, there's a couple actually pretty much about the same thing. When you don't have all the answers, it's more of a leadership question, but from a psychological perspective, how can you project that confidence, that strength, that, to offer a sense of calm and reassurance when on the inside you're already spiraling yourself because you don't know, you don't have the answers.
Yeah. You know what? It's all the research out there says when it comes to how to address questions like this, it's not about what you say, it's how you say it. And a lot of people I spoke to over the last few weeks, especially leaders, especially women in leadership as well, have said, I don't know what to say to my team because I don't have an answer, so I don't say anything at all. And the thing is, whatever you resist will persist. And not knowing is actually so much worse than knowing the worst possible scenario, right? So sometimes when people say to us, when we don't know, like, let me give you a scenario. A lot of people have lost their jobs lately, but not knowing and going into work and someone just doesn't talk about anything makes it more anxiety triggering because we think, am I next? Who's next? What am I going to do? Whereas if a manager stood up in front of that team and said, I don't know what's going to happen and I cannot guarantee your workplaces, but the moment I know something, I will let you know. Like, that is not providing any false reassurance. That is not, being overly positive. It's literally naming it. You got to name it to tame it. So if I'm coming into a conversation saying, you know what, team, I wish I had the answers for you, but I don't. But I want you to know I'm here for you. And if you do want to talk, I'm ready to talk and I'm here and I am available to talk. But when I know more, you're going to know more, but I don't have the answer right now. So that's what I would say. When you don't know, don't run away. Tell people that you don't know, because that's human and that is realistic. And I just did a parent talk before this, and that's what I said to parents as well. Like, what do we say when our kids say to us, what if an alarm happens in school? What if we have to go back to online learning? Yeah, don't say it won't happen. It might. So you say, you know what? It might happen. And if it does, you are safe and the school know what to do and the authorities know what to do. And we've got to trust that we're safe. So it's literally going in there in a very realistic, steady way.
Amazing. You've given us a lot of tips and tricks today, but is there any advice that you would specifically give to young women leaders?
Young women who are leaders, that's a good one.
Do they actually experience uncertainty or stress differently?
I think it's very individualized. I
Mm,
think it could be a superpower in ways, and they might not. A lot of younger generations have a lot more awareness of mental health and well-being and ask for what they want. But that's not always the case. But that's a trend that I often see. So I would say the exact same thing. I would say ask and share. And don't be afraid to admit your mistakes and share your failures, but also don't be afraid of someone over you who's senior to you or older than you. Like, don't feel like, oh, because there's such an age gap, like, who am I? You might actually be able to bring the greatest skills into that team and new, fresh perspectives and ideas. So I think, again, do the work on yourself where you know your values, you know how you want to live, you know how to communicate with different ages and stages and cultures, and going into things from a very informed capacity, but also this idea that I am a student and I'm always a student. But I would say the same to a senior leader who's been in the company for years. You're still a student, you're still learning, so you don't want to close that door. That's what I would say. I don't know if anyone else actually has more tips, or if you are here today and you are a young individual in a leadership position, what has worked for you? That's the first question I've never been asked that question before. So I hope I answered it correctly, but I'm sure someone else might have a better answer there.
Oh, if anybody has any tips or expertise in that, please drop that in the Q&A as well. My last question, is there a way we can turn uncertainty to our advantage?
Yep, you can grow from it. You can use uncertainty and the most painful experiences in your life to build resilience. And I'll explain this a little bit. Resiliency is the ability to be agile. It's the ability to bounce back. It's not the ability to be immune to any kind of bad things happening in your life or any uncertain times. So if uncertainty is agility and it's flexibility and it's falling down and bouncing back up, how do you think that people actually build the muscle for that, the tolerance for that? They build it through discomfort. They build it through pain. They build it through failure. They build it through grief. They build it through sadness. So it is very important that you actually can see this, not just, how am I going to get through this? Like, how could I potentially grow through this? How can I use the skills? And it's the exact same for physical health. If you're trying to develop a six-pack or get super fit, you're not going to do that by being not in the gym or not training or not pushing yourself. You're going to do it through pushing harder and increasing the weights or increasing your personal best and all those things. So a lot of it is mindset. And if you can, for yourself, for your family, for your team, if you can have the mindset of, I'm going to surrender to discomfort and I'm going to sit in it in a healthy way and I'm going to move through it and I'm going to learn through it, your body and your brain will never forget those things. So the muscles will actually be there and you keep practicing them. And then for the next thing that happens, because we've had COVID and we've had floods and we have this and we have something else and something else will happen. The only certain thing out there is uncertainty is coming. So I think the more that you can actually build the muscular tolerance for uncertainty, the more that you can use it as essentially a power that works with you.
Wow, there you have it, ladies. So to summarize what I'm taking away for myself, and I hope everybody else and is doing the same and more. Well, we learned today that we need to lean into the self-doubts. As women leaders, we're not caregivers. There is a ceiling to our empathy. We need to invest in the foundation for our mental well-being, that is nutrition, exercise. And we need to look into offering, thinking of flexibility, of transition ritual. And the third, I'm going to ask you to chime in again. Anna, what was the third one?
Oh, for my three tools.
Flexibility, transition.
Flexibility, transitions, and good enough.
And good enough, exactly. And to basically reframe how we think about leadership, how we think about uncertainty, and think that it could be something that we can use to our advantage. And honestly, from everything you're saying, Anna, I feel the foundation of it all is to truly think that we need to be kind to ourselves.
Yeah.
That, as women leaders, yes, there is massive expectations from everybody put on us. We have a lot of expectations, that we put on ourselves, but we also need to take care of ourselves and give ourselves some grace and forgive ourselves. This is not something that only us are going through. We're not responsible of changing the world, making it better for anybody. It is okay to feel anxious, to make mistakes, and to worry
Yeah.
about what's happening.
I echo what you're saying. And
Yeah.
self-compassion is not an extra, by the way. It's not a soft skill. If you want to show up tomorrow and next week and next month, self-kindness and being compassionate is foundational. You've got to do it. It's not an extra. It's not only at the weekends. It is literally daily habits that you need to implement in order to keep you going in a healthy way.
Thank you so much, Anna. I feel like I'm walking away emotional because I feel like, oh my God, a lot of things I understand now, but a lot of very practical tips as well that I will always keep in the back of my mind and make a point to practice. This session is part of a series that we conduct weekly next session is about uncertainty while caregiving. So I hope all the mothers here and everybody who's not a mother and knows a mother, please let them know about the upcoming session and future sessions as well. Thank you, Anna, so much.
Thank you.
And we can't wait for future conversations with you and everybody at the Lighthouse Arabia.
Thank you so much for your time. And I loved it. I just feel like it was such a lovely conversation. So
Same.
thank you. Thank you so
Need
much.
more like this. You're welcome. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and I will see you at the next session.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone. Thank you. Take care.